Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. This is the Thursday or Friday, depending on which class period you're in, right before spring break, and we're going to finish up Chapter 5 with Lesson 3, talking about cost, revenue, and profit maximization. And so we're going to just jump right in and get this thing started. Here is our SWABOT for today. So our essential question is, how do companies determine the most profitable way to operate? So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to differentiate among fixed, variable, total, and marginal costs. Should be able to explain the differences in average, total, and marginal revenue. Should be able to describe the cost advantages of e-commerce. And you should be able to identify the relationship between profit maximization and break-even analysis. All right, so we'll jump in here and start off with that first guiding question off of the main question, the essential question. Excuse me. And that first guiding question is, what is the difference between a fixed cost and a variable cost? Excuse me, sorry. All right, so in order for businesses to operate efficiently, they really do need to look at a lot of different measures of costs in order to make sure that they stay within their means and are, of course, making profit. So the first cost that they look at is known as fixed cost. So we did deal with kind of fixed and variable costs a little bit when we did budgeting. So of course, fixed costs are any costs that never change, okay? So these are costs for a company, and when we're talking about production, fixed costs are the costs that an organization or a company incurs so that they have, even if there is little to no activity going on. So if there's no production going on, or if there's a ton of production going on, these costs do not change. So a lot of times we refer to these costs as what is called overhead. And again, they always remain the same. So overhead is that kind of first overarching, you must pay these bills before anything else, and these bills never change. So they're your known, they're not a variable, they're not something that's unknown, they're something that you know is going to happen month to month. You know exactly how much they are so that you can budget for it exactly month to month. So some examples of fixed costs, executive salaries or salaries for anybody, not hourly employees, because that's different. That can be variable, but fixed costs are salaries. Excuse me. Interest on bonds. If your corporation or company sells bonds, you've got to pay the interest payments on those. Rent payments on leased property. Could be the building, could be equipment that you're using, that you're leasing. State and local property taxes, those really don't change. So it might also include depreciation. We talked a little bit about depreciation when we talked about cars, right? So depreciation is the value that is lost due to wear and tear on, in this case, on a capital good, a tool. Okay, so machinery tends to wear down with use. Computers get old and you have to replace them. So anything that has to be repaired regularly, have maintenance work done to it regularly, or has to be replaced every so often depreciates. And those are fixed costs because you know roughly when those are going to come up. You know when the maintenance needs to be done. You know how often you need to replace certain parts. So that's why those are considered fixed costs. So then variable costs is the second measure, and these are the costs, of course, that change. Definition of variable, right? And they change mostly as the output changes. So as output increases, the variable costs increase. As output decreases, the variable costs decrease. Okay? And usually variable costs are associated with labor and raw materials. The raw materials that you use to produce your products and the labor that you use to produce those products as well. So those two things are usually factored into and are a major part of variable costs. In fact, for most businesses, their largest variable cost is labor. So that's paying for the hourly wages, the health benefits, and other fringe benefits for the employees, and things of that matter. Okay. So then total cost is just like that sounds. Okay, it's the total cost. So it's the sum of the variable and the fixed costs together right? That's the sum, right? Those two things added together is the total cost. So once we've gotten the total cost, then we can move on to the most important measure for a business, which is the marginal cost. Now, you might remember last lesson we talked about marginal product, which was each additional unit produced by a new employee, right? Marginal cost is similar. Marginal cost is the extra cost incurred when producing one more unit of output. Okay, so marginal cost helps companies understand how much more it's going to cost them to produce more. And when they kind of reach that stage 3, remember, of diminishing returns, okay, returns can happen in cost and profit maximization as well. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so that guiding question again. What's the difference between fixed cost and variable cost? Pause here to answer. All right, so the difference between fixed cost and variable cost, fixed costs never change, regardless of how much output is happening. And fixed costs are related to capital goods, where variable costs change as output changes and are more related to raw materials and labor. That's the answer to the question. All right, so we're going to go into revenue now, finding marginal revenue, okay? So once a factory or a company has figured out how much they can produce, now it's time to kind of factor out how much money they can make and how much money they're going to be taking in. That's income or revenue, okay? So the definition of revenue is income. Any revenue is income. We talked a little bit about revenue when we talked about taxes in government class. Okay, so hopefully you remembered from then. If not, this is your reminder. Okay, so second most important measure for a business is finding that marginal revenue. Here is our second guiding question. So be watching for the answer to this as we go through. Why is marginal revenue more important than the average revenue? We'll find out why. Okay, so first of all, we got to talk about that average revenue. So average revenue is the average price that every unit of output sells for. Okay, so for example, if a company sells every unit for $15, then its average revenue is $15, and that doesn't change if they sell 10 items or 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000. The average is still going to be 15 if the output, if they sell each unit at the same price. Okay, but that's not completely realistic, but that's our example. Okay, so average revenue is actually the least useful of all the revenue measures, and more or less of any of the measures that we've talked about so far, really. Okay, so total revenue, of course, again, really easy to understand. It is just the total revenue. It's all the revenue that a business receives. So all the income that a business receives from selling its product. So total revenue is equal to the total number of units sold multiplied by their price. Okay, so if one worker is hired who produces 7 units and those units are sold at 15 each, then the total revenue from that is $105, right? 7 times 15. If 10 workers are hired and their total output is 148, and each of those units sell for 15 each, then the total revenue is $2,220. It's very simple. 148 times 15, okay, gets us 2,220. So why is this important? It's important to know how much money your business is going to be taking in, so you know whether or not you can pay your bills, whether you can pay those fixed and variable costs. And so if hiring 10 workers that produce 148 units that sell for $15 each, and $2,200 is not enough money at the end of the month for you to pay all of your bills, then you know you need to hire more workers that can produce more output. So the most important measure of revenue is what's called marginal revenue. And again, just like marginal cost and marginal product, marginal revenue is related to how much more revenue, how much extra revenue or income a business receives from the production and sale of one additional unit. Okay, so marginal revenue, just like marginal product and marginal cost, really only looks at the extra from the extra income from producing one additional unit. Okay, just one additional unit. And to find that marginal revenue, you have to divide the change in total revenue by the change in total output. Okay, so make sure you have that in your notes because you may be asked to do that kind of math, simple though math, on a test question. So here's our example, okay? Business employs 5 workers, okay? That business, those 5 workers produce 90 units of output, generates $1,350 of total revenue, okay? If they hire a 6th worker, their output increases by 20. Doesn't increase to 20, increases by 20, okay? So what's the difference? So increases by 20, okay? So 20 is our marginal product, okay? Our total revenue is $1,650 now. So to find the marginal revenue, we have to divide the change in total revenue, so 1,650 minus 1,350, okay, which gives us 300. And we divide that by the marginal product, which is 20, okay, because that 6th worker created 20 more units, okay? And that gives us a marginal revenue of $15, okay? Now, this one was kind of easy, and you could have really guessed at it, honestly, because we're using $15 for every unit, and we're treating it as if this company, this fake company, only manufactures one product, and that product sells for $15. In reality, that's not the case. Think of a company like Nike. Not all of their shoes sell for the same price. Some shoes sell for more, some shoes sell for less. So, marginal revenue isn't always the same as the average revenue. Okay, so don't confuse those two because they don't always come together, right? In this example, they just did. All right, so now we're going on to profit maximization and break even. So here's our third guiding question. What cost advantage does e-commerce offer business? Okay. Well, what is profit maximization? Well, let's look at profit maximizing quantity of output, okay? So that's the volume of production, okay? So how much production you have to do, so how much output does it take in order for marginal cost and marginal revenue to equal itself? Okay, for those two to become equal. Marginal cost and marginal revenue to be equal, okay? That's where you get profit maximization, okay? So why do companies do this? Well, basically to know when to hire and when not to hire, and we'll see why, okay? So sometimes a company might not be able to sell enough to maximize its profits right away. If it's a brand new company with a brand new product, it might not immediately have all of the attention it needs to be super successful. But they do need to know how much to sell in order to cover their costs. That is known as the break-even point. Okay, the level of production that generates just enough revenue to cover the total cost. Okay. Now, most businesses, that's not their goal, to just break even. Their goal is to make a profit. So they've got to figure out, once they figure out the break-even point, then they know how much more they need to produce. And basically everything after that break-even point is gravy or icing on the cake or whatever you want to call it. It's the goods, it's the profit, it's the extra money. It's what makes the business owner rich and wealthy. Turn you into Scrooge McDuck. All right, costs in business operation. This is where we get to talk a little bit about the internet. The internet really has made some major changes in the costs of business operations. So e-commerce is defined as electronic business conducted over the internet. So anytime you shop or do business on your phone or through any kind of internet or website, you are participating in e-commerce. Okay, so great thing about e-commerce is that companies don't have to spend money to rent a building and stock it with inventory. Why? Because it's all sold online. They don't have to design office space and use up a ton of electricity. So we've really seen a lot happen over this COVID pandemic right now, with companies realizing that their employees that they thought they had to have in an office in order to supervise them, watch them, eagle eye them all the time, that as they've been working from home, have actually been more efficient in a lot of cases, and at least as efficient as they were when they were working in the office. So companies have started to get these bright ideas that, hey, our office staff that work almost completely computer based don't need to be in an office. So we can get rid of all this extra office space, lower our fixed costs and some of our variable costs, basically lower the total cost to operate, and then let their employees work from home. And that makes the employees happy, makes the business happy, makes the stockholders that are going to get more of that profit kicked back to them happy. Everybody is happier. So is this going to continue after the COVID pandemic is done? It kind of looks like it. We'll have to wait and see. The other big question is what's going to happen to all of those huge office buildings? If people are going to be allowed to mostly work from home, what's going to happen to all those skyscrapers and huge office buildings? We might be able to get rid of them, and that could be a good thing. So, stuff to think about. Only time will tell, right? All right, so what? Why are we learning about this? Well, remember our essential question was, how do companies determine the most profitable way to operate? And the answer is they've got to look at their costs and their revenues, okay? So marginal cost and marginal revenue are going to help them decide what the most profitable way to operate is. And once they figure out that break-even point, then again, everything above that is full 100% profit, baby. It's green. It's the gravy. It's the icing. It's the good stuff. It's the clams, right? It's going to pay the bills and make life nice and fun and easy. So there's our so what. There's our lesson. Chapter 5 has come to a close, and we'll be taking a quiz on all of this here pretty soon. So see you on the other side.